There's a theory going around about Tears of the Kingdom and how it might tie directly into Skyward Sword, and to briefly describe it, the theory places Tears of the Kingdom at the very end of the timeline, but also at the very beginning of the timeline, with the following game being Skyward Sword. The main argument for this theory is the usage of the Ouroboros in Tears of the Kingdom's logo. Ouroboros being the dragons eating their own tail in an endless cycle representing the circle of life and death, or eternity. I certainly hope for this theory to be true, as it feels perfect narratively, but unfortunately, I fear there is one glaring issue that may prevent it. When Skyward Sword released, Zelda fans went crazy finally knowing how the Legend of Zelda series truly started. I mean, prior to that, many believed Minish Cap was the earliest because of how Link started the game without a hat and only received it later, and I mean, at that time, they were technically correct, but I don't think that's what the developers had in mind. Skyward Sword, in my opinion, became the penultimate game in the series, but not because of the gameplay. Oh, definitely not because of the gameplay, but because it had the most impactful story, as nothing can truly beat the fact that it's the whole reason all other Zeldas have happened. But you might ask, how do you succeed the most impactful game in the series? And the answer to that? Well, it's to just ignore the story and make the game happen thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years after any prior game, and make the gameplay and world so incredibly fun that most people don't even care about the story. That's how. But then you decide you want to make a sequel to that game. What then? Well, you could try fine-tuning the gameplay, or even add a feature that allows almost endless gameplay variations, but without a proper and interesting story to rival Skyward Sword, you're sure to know the fans won't be happy. But how do you beat the beginning of the whole series? Clearly, you do the very end of the series, the events that close everything out. It would be incredibly interesting for fans, and the game would easily become a bestseller. It will be the game everyone will talk about. But ultimately, it makes the problem worse. Let's think 10 years down the line. While, yes, Nintendo could make hundreds of Zelda games taking place before the Calamity, how could they possibly hope to make a threat and stakes more important than the end of all timelines, and the start of the franchise? You could always say that they don't have to up the stakes for the next Zelda game, and you'd absolutely be correct. But in terms of excitement and hype to be built around the games, I don't know where the franchise could go past Tears of the Kingdom. I would absolutely adore seeing more restrained classic 3D Zeldas like Twilight Princess or Ocarina of Time, and we've been waiting far too long for another 2D Zelda, but when it comes to sales, I'd be surprised if any of those could ever hope to match up to Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. And that's the biggest issue. Since, after all, Nintendo is a business and they will always work for what earns the most money, I find it hard to believe that they could do something like officially end the Legend of Zelda timeline-wise, as it would ultimately harm future sales, and unless Zelda endlessly increases stakes, there's not much more room for growth. If this is to be the penultimate game in the series, then maybe that's why they're charging $70, as a way to make more profit to allow future games to be smaller scale. 2, in recent years, we've also seen games like Smash Bros. Ultimate, which is another penultimate game in this series, that could seemingly never be beat, but despite that, it was still made. And future games will supposedly be much simpler. This is another theory entirely, but I feel like we're in a new era for Nintendo. Each of their franchises are nearing or have already reached their ultimate unbeatable games, and I believe that soon Nintendo will have to start drawing back in scale and intensity, and the future of Nintendo will likely be smaller games focused on very specific details. If this is the case, I believe we're honestly in for an amazing time. And while the games won't be huge events in history, the games will rather just be fun. And that's what I've been feeling. I believe making Tears of the Kingdom the beginning of an endless time loop would be an amazing story, but I don't believe it's good for business long term. Although even without it, the next games in the Zelda series are gonna have an incredibly rough time succeeding because there's only so many ways Nintendo can make Zelda further open. We've reached the bounds of gameplay, and in terms of innovation and new ideas, I fear there's nowhere else to grow. We've reached the proverbial ceiling in Zelda, and the only way I could see to increase the limit is to make the story far drawn back than the end and beginning of times. But who really even knows? Nintendo has armies of professionals who could always surprise us. But then again, you never know. We'll just have to check back in later to see if they manage the impossible. Until then, stay cool. Wait, P.S. Before you go, I have a bonus theory. I just saw a video recommending to me theorizing Tears of the Kingdom to have multiple endings, and I think this would be the perfect way for the team to make this game as grand as possible, but also allow future games to be equally, if not more grand. Think of it this way. The main/true ending of this game could be the outcome that leads straight into Skyward Sword, or maybe the bad ending where Ganon wins. But then we can have another Ocarina of Time situation where the other endings make branching timelines with completely different legends possible. Perhaps the good ending completely destroys Ganon and demises Curse, putting an end to the cycle. Anything is possible, and I believe this is the best way for them to make the biggest stories they want without having to worry about the repercussions on Breath of the Wild. And I know people are going to pull out their hair with more timelines, but come on, as annoying as Ocarina's time split is, think about how boring Zelda would be if it had a straight linear timeline. Anyways, I'll see you next week when I eat an entire jar of mayonnaise. Don't ask me why the bonus theory is 1/5 of the whole video. Bye.